Call to order the meeting of Mayor and Council. If you rise for the invocation by Councilman Holland.
Let us pray. Father God, we stand before you on this night at this council meeting. We pray that you bless it with your presence and guide us and lead us through it with wisdom, knowledge, and common sense to help make smart, wise decisions. Now, I'd like to take this moment to send a prayer out for Jeffrey Atkins' family and friends for the loved one they had lost, Father God. We pray that you be with them and see them through their grievance. And you bless and surround them with friends and family to be there for one another and comfort one another. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Please remain standing for the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Okay, do we have any changes to tonight's agenda?
No, sir, not to the agenda that's dated revised 8/6/20.
Okay, perfect. Okay, you've all received our minutes from our July 28th meeting. If there are no questions or comments, I'll accept a motion to receive the minutes.
Dan Henderson, so moved, Mr. Mayor.
Here we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Orlando Holland, I second that motion,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Okay, do we have any correspondence tonight?
Yes, sir, we have two pieces of correspondence. The first one is from former Councilman Grace Peterson, and she writes, I really appreciate the unique flower arrangement with burgundy, pink, and fuchsia flowers. To make it unique, there were 7 thin, look like asparagus spears stalks all around the bouquet. I know Ben would have said, the heads of the council table. I have especially enjoyed the arrangement. Thank you so much. Love, Grace. So she really appreciated the gesture from council.
And if you guys knew Ben, that's exactly what he would have
made a
said.
comment. So the other piece of correspondence that's in your board pack is a note from Paul Wydell, who's the Engineering Services and Systems Operations Superintendent for the City of Dover Electric Department. And it says, I cannot express our gratitude to you and your crews for the assistance given to us in Dover. Tropical storm Isaias gave us a wallop that left what we estimate to be 1/3 of our service area out of power. Your crews arrived and fell right into the recovery efforts, and their work was vital to our recovery efforts. I am happy to report that as of this morning, we are completely restored with the exception of those services with underlying problems. Please pass on the electric departments in the city of Dover's thanks to your crews and special thanks to you for being willing to support us. The next time you need assistance, please reach out to us and we will make every effort to return the favor. And just a little bit of background, 3 of our men went up, Greg Brook, Jordan Marvel, and Nick Smart, and they spent, I believe it was a total of approximately 11 hours assisting with restoring power up there. They said it was a great experience. They were amazed at how devastated the areas that they were in were and how needy the people were. So it was a great thing, and that was volunteer work that they did. They all had to raise their hand and say they would do it. So we're very appreciative of those men and their skills.
Well, it's the blessing to live in a small state and small communities where we can all pitch in and help each other. And surely Dover would come down and help us in a second.
Absolutely.
So appreciate those guys stepping forward. All right, we'll go on to new business, and Tracy Torbert's here to present something on voter registration, some investigative work she's done.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
So I'm here tonight to provide you with some information regarding the municipal election voter registration process. As you all are aware, just to kind of refresh, everyone has been through the process, so you know that we currently maintain our own book of registered voters, which is spelled out per our city charter. There are some municipalities in the state that use the state's voter registration records. I have spoken with many clerks and different staff members from our surrounding communities, and from my research, I have found that only Georgetown and Millsboro use the state's database in Sussex County. Charles Trisha and myself did a phone conference with staff from both the town of Millsboro and town of Georgetown to inquire about their experiences using the state's database. Both of these municipalities have very limited experience due to the fact that they haven't had a need for an election in many years. The town of Millsboro had their election this year for the first time in many years, and the town of Georgetown is scheduled to have theirs this Saturday. So our current charter says that we allow non-resident property owners to vote in our election, as well as those that reside in the city limits. As a way to increase our numbers of voters, we have added a line item on the bottom of our service agreement for utility service. When someone comes in to get services established in their name, they can check that box and we add them into the Book of Registered Voters. Last year, we did a site visit to the Methodist Manor House and the Nanticoke Senior Center to allow people the opportunity to register to vote, to check to see if they were registered, and to also do an absentee ballot. During the Senior Center visit, we did not have anybody register or complete an absentee ballot. We did have a couple people inquire, but they were not eligible. And during that visit, we also had Department of Elections there that did a demonstration of the new machine. So we did have some people do that, but they weren't eligible for our election. During our visit to the Manor House, many people registered, which everyone that resides there is eligible. So that was, one way that people that can't leave the Manor House, we do that courtesy to go to them. And we had many people that checked their registration, and we had some that also did take advantage of voting absentee. We did also, to get people registered to vote in this last election, we did 2 times City Hall had extended office hours. So we stayed open till 8 o'clock, 2 different days. And both times we had nobody come in to register to vote. Both times we did extended office hours. So that's just a little bit about our current practice of what we do. So I wanted to provide a brief, for 5 years, what has our voter turnout been? So this was 2015 to current, and I did include in here what seats were up for election. So as you can see, in 2020 and in 2018, those were our 2 biggest years of turnouts. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is the fact that the most seats were up, to include the mayor and 2 council seats. And it does include how many absentee ballots were also, and obviously this year it was increased due to the COVID-19. So that just shows a little bit of background about what our voter turnout has been the last 5 years. So the question is what would happen if we were to change from maintaining our Book of Registered Voters to going over to the state's database? Well, currently we maintain our own records, and we are able to troubleshoot. Say if someone comes in and their name is not on our rolls, or we can't find them on the papers for them to sign or anything like that. Any issues that we have, we can troubleshoot them ourselves because we maintain our own records. We can look back in the different years to say, oh, well, you were on the roll last year, so, somehow you got taken off. Well, we also keep an Excel spreadsheet to include everyone that's taken off. So we can go back on that Excel spreadsheet to say, oh, you were taken off. We keep it by year. In 2018, did you move out of town? Because if you do move out of town, you do have to re-register, things like that. So we can troubleshoot our issues based on our records that we currently have in our office. If we were to go to the state system, we would have to utilize an on-call person that Department of Elections would provide. So we would have to call them and ask them to assist us over the phone to settle any dispute that we may have the day of the election. So that's one, thing that would be different. Another thing is in my conversations with other clerks in other towns, I have not found any municipalities that allow non-resident property owners that utilize the state's database. So in last year's election, just for your information, there was 86 non-registered property owners that were registered to vote in our election. So the way that I see it is, in order to maintain those voters, we would have to keep a separate database. Like, we would use the state system, but then they wouldn't pull through on the state systems because they're not in the 19973 zip code. They could live in California and be able to vote here because they own property. So they wouldn't come through with that information. So if we were to decide to go to the state's database, what would have to happen? What steps would need to occur? First, we would have to enter into an agreement with them, an MOU. And in this, it would basically just state the roles and responsibilities of them and of us. It just outlines everything that we would have to do and everything that they would have to do. That would have to be executed. Then they would send over an Excel spreadsheet that has multiple fields that staff would have to go through and code and say, this person lives, this address is eligible, this address is eligible. So we would code them with whatever code they tell us to do. We would send that back to them, and then they would send it back to us so that we would have our roll for our election, because they would update it into their system. So we would have to keep in mind, when you're running for office as a candidate, that when you ask for a list of eligible voters, I would have to request that from Department of Elections and then wait for them to return it to me. Rather than now, it's on the O drive, I can just give it to you, as it's updated. So we just, it's not a big deal, but you just have to think of, you're kind of on their time to provide the information to us. Many of you have probably heard about House Bill 175 and what that relates to, which is voting by mail. So I reached out to the State Election Commissioner, Anthony Albanese, to get some clarification on this House bill. There's been a lot of talk about it, about the current upcoming elections. So as of right now, this legislation only covers state elections. Municipalities would, according to Anthony, he said, municipalities would continue to offer absentee as we normally have in the past. And this is according to the governor's executive order 15 modification of the state of emergency, which is still in effect today. So a lot of people question, how is vote by mail different than absentee voting? And basically the simplest way to put it is vote by mail is absentee voting with no excuse, no reason. So when you get your request, a ballot for your absentee ballot, you have to check a reason. You're sick, you're disabled, you're on vacation, you're on the military. When you request a ballot to vote by mail, you don't have to provide a reason. You're just requesting a ballot, but there's no area that says check why. But we need to keep in mind that when you vote by mail, you still have to complete this request out just like you do an absentee ballot request. You just don't get a ballot. You always have to fill this request out prior to getting a ballot for either absentee voting or vote by mail voting. And in my conversations with other clerks, it's anticipated that this House bill will probably not go into effect until 2021, and it may only pertain to state elections. Therefore, if municipalities wanted to offer this, they would have to do a charter change to put that change into place. So I just wanted to give just a couple bullet points of what we currently do, what my research was of how, if you went to the state database, that would do. This is just for informational purposes only tonight. We do need to keep in mind that if any change is desired to our voter registration process, that a charter change would need to be put in place, because that spells out when we have our elections, the time of our elections, the deadlines for our elections, and our voter registration process. And that could possibly mean that if any changes are desired, they would not go in effect until the 2022 municipal election, just because a charter change does take a lot of time. We just went through one, it took about 10 months. So, and we don't really want to make a change right in the middle of an ongoing election to confuse the candidates and the people voting.
Okay.
So, does anyone have any questions or comments?
Any questions from council? Councilman Henderson?
I'll yield to Councilman King. He had his hand up first.
All right, thank you, sir. Tracy, just a couple questions. First job, great job with the presentation.
Thank you.
Could we go back and look at the actual vote count by year? How many registered, what's the population and the ability for residents in our community to vote? Do you know what that number is?
Well, according to our U.S. Census, it's about 6972. There's a current census ongoing, so I'm sure that number will grow.
So can we round it up to 7,000 just to make things easier? So out of 7,000 potential voters, if you look over the last 5 years, the biggest year being last year of almost 600 people Has there been any thought to reach out to the residents of our community and ask them why? So, and the reason that I'm saying that, when you look at the amount of people that are registered to vote, that number is a lot bigger than the actual turnout. How many people were registered to vote in our last election that just happened?
It was about 1,300.
Yeah, so half of those actually turn out to vote. So my recommendation or suggestion is to reach out to potential voters and ask them, why aren't they coming out? Is it the day? Is it the time? I mean, what barriers or what can we do maybe to make it easier or get some feedback from potential voters on why the turnout is so low?
Well, and I will say, some of you may have been on council, I think maybe Henderson and Genshaw were, when we did change the time. It used to be Saturday from 10 to 6, and the argument was, oh, I get working in the yard, and then I forget at, 10 o'clock to go vote. So then at that council at that time did choose to change the time from 7 to 3. So we have played around with the time a little bit. I mean, Saturdays was chosen because people work during the week. So, I mean, I'm not saying that, we can always do whatever you guys desire. And we have talked about doing some outreach events, like once events do go back into place, maybe going to Ephraim or setting up something at Riverfest.
Well, the reason that I'm asking, when you look at states with the biggest voter turnout, some of the things they have is same-day registration, right? So you can register up to the day of election. In the day and time. So when you look at this number, to me, it's very dismal. It's very low when you look at potentially 7,000 voters. So I'm just suggesting we reach out to potential voters and saying, hey, what do we need to do?
Right.
Maybe not so much the council giving you direction or suggestion, actually reaching out to the residents of our community and asking them what we can do to grow that number.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's our responsibility, I feel, as people that are running for election to get people to the polls.
Correct.
And so feedback from them on what we can do to make things easier, or maybe take some of those obstacles and barriers, would be interesting to know, to maybe drive that number a lot higher.
Yeah. We can look and brainstorm on some different, ways to do a survey or get some information out.
Maybe even a panel of people, maybe putting a group of people together to do some further investigation and research and coming back to us and presenting some things. Maybe that would even be a suggestion. The committee.
All right. Any other questions from council? Councilman Henderson?
A couple things. Number one, I think it should be pointed out that even though our population's 7,000, a significant portion of those folks are under 18 and not eligible to vote. So there's a significant number, less than 7,000, that are actually eligible to vote. That being said, less than half of them, I think, are registered to vote, less than half of the eligible voters. But my question to you, Tracy, would be, would you be willing, if the city manager allowed it, to consult with Rehoboth Beach? They just had an election where they had 1,731 registered voters and got 1,471 voters to vote. And see how they accomplished that. Was it candidate driven, or did the city actually play a role in getting people to come vote? Because my personal feeling is that the candidates should be the ones responsible for getting people to the polls. The city takes a role in communicating and facilitating, but getting people to vote is up to us.
Correct, as part of your campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can reach out to their city clerk and see. I do know that they have a tremendous amount of non-registered property owners that vote in their election, so I'll be interested to see too how many were absentee and how many were
They had a
in
significant
person.
number of.
Well, the number of absentee voters was 1,146. So there was only like 300 some people who actually showed up to the polls. So that was just, I don't know if that's proportionately similar to what Seaford had, but no, I don't think it is. I think it was about 50% with Seaford. But
Yeah, we had,
you do have a number of absentee people, and I don't even know, do absentee or do non-resident property owners get to vote
in
in
Rehoboth.
Rehoboth? Okay, so that's a correlation. That makes it a little bit similar, and we could maybe learn something to get voters engaged, like Councilman King said. So, yeah, I'd be interested if the city manager would allow you to spend some time on that, to get a little bit more background on that.
Yeah, and our city clerk has been there for many years too, so she might be able to provide some insight.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from council?
I have a question.
Councilman Santos?
Yes, Councilman Santos here. I have, you mentioned that right now you guys troubleshoot if someone comes and says, hey, I'm a registered voter, I can't vote for whatever reason, or I'm not in the list. If we were to switch over, would it be similar to how, if someone goes to the primary elections, if they call someone and someone's able to answer, in a matter of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, is that what it would be like?
I
Or
can't
would it-
really speak on that, on their behalf, on how long it would take. I don't know because ours is on a Saturday. Some other towns that I've talked with, their municipal elections are on the weekdays, so obviously they have office hours. For instance, I spoke with someone from Newark, they do 8 to 8. So from 8 to 4, someone's in the office at Department of Elections, so they just call the office. Now, after hours, I'm assuming, this is my assumption, that they provide them with a laptop or something so they can look up their records. But I can't say that that's exactly how they do it. But I would assume it wouldn't be a long time period. But it would be similar
Probably
to
the
that to
probably
answer your
same day?
question.
Same
All
day
same
kind
day,
of thing?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, they call it like a fail-safe, like during the primaries and general elections. But we have to keep in mind too, these people do still have to be registered to vote in all the other elections. When you use the state's database, they still have to be registered to vote in the primary, so they still have to meet those qualifications, or when they go to DMV to get their license, they have to say, yes, I want to be registered to vote. It's just not an automatic, once you get your driver's license, you get on the rolls to vote.
And their license has to be up to date.
Yes, and that's another thing. We always have to keep in mind there's always human error that can happen here, whether we use their system, our system, there's never going to be 100% accurate. And speaking with one of the towns, their town clerk and her husband weren't on their rolls, and they lived in town for many years, and, they knew that they were registered. There's always those hiccups that are going to happen. You just troubleshoot them and work through them. But say if someone, uses their mom's address on their license because they don't want to keep changing their address because there's just fee, whatever. If they don't update that address within our city limits, when that information comes over from the state, they won't be included in our data.
Okay, which I had a second question. Would it be possible to do a hybrid in case that were to happen?
That would be something that,
I mean, we'd have to look at that, charter language. I don't know of anybody who does that. So, that would be something we'd have to do some research on.
Okay.
and,
Not real sure what you mean by hybrid.
when you speak of hybrid, I mean, the only people that necessarily wouldn't be in the information we would get from the state would be those that didn't change their address on their license. Everyone else would pull through, so everyone that was registered would already be in there. The only ones that wouldn't pull through would be non-resident property owners and those that haven't updated their address.
Yeah, I was speaking more towards the ones that haven't updated their address, but maybe they've come to the city and they've checked that bottom.
Oh, yeah.
But,
So when you say hybrid system, do you mean maintain the book and use the state database? Is that what your thoughts are, Councilman?
yes, in case they had, she said, hadn't changed their address, but they moved to the city, and because I know that happens quite a bit.
I mean, being here in an election, it's already confusing enough trying to track down with kind of one database. Maybe a better thought to think about is whichever one we're going to go with. If we change away from, the Book of Registered Voters, when we go through that, in that process where we transition, we can match everybody that's in that registered book of voters to that new database. And then, people who are not on that list, or we find that are not registered duly, we can send them a letter and say, currently you are not on the state's list, and we're going to move away from that in 2022. So this is your notice that you need to address it in some kind of way. Either go over to the state and get registered, or, you lose your ability to vote, it appears to us.
Well, I think we do also need to keep in mind that the people that run our elections for us, it's not city staff, it's the Board of Elections that is appointed by your body. So we try our best to make it as simple and as easy for them to follow. We're of course here to provide assistance to them, but we don't want to make anything more confusing on their end, you know, if we can.
Any other questions from council? I'm going to ask you two. You two haven't asked yet. You good? Councilman Henderson?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do, but go ahead. Sure. Yep, thank
I
you.
have a two-part question. One would be, for those who haven't obtained the privilege of a driver's license, does the state maintain ID cards, and would that be part of the data that would be sent?
So from my experience, my conversations with Gene Turner at Department of Elections, they base it not necessarily, I use DMV as an example because that's a lot of times where people, you know, go and that's where they register, but you can go over there and register to vote at Department of Elections without, you know, having anything to do with your ID or your license. So you can always just go and vote, or you can vote, you can register to vote online.
Well, I'm a little bit confused. Is it not a DMV list, or is it a Department of Elections list?
Department of Elections pulls their list from DMV to get the addresses,
Okay.
but you can still register to vote through the Department of Elections.
All right. So the data we're going to get would be from the Department of Elections,
Yes.
not DMV?
No.
Because, you know, there's a significant portion of people in the city who have surrendered their license due to age.
Correct.
Or infirmity, blindness, other handicaps. So, you know, not everybody drives, so I just wanted to make sure that there was a fail-safe that even though
It
they don't have a
catches them.
license, that they
Right.
are on the book. So the second follow-up would be, would you be willing to put some effort into a provisional ballot if a dispute cannot be resolved, and have a provisional ballot while the dispute gets resolved? So a voter comes in and they're not on the books, but it's where they work, and they cast a ballot. Maybe it's got to be a paper ballot, because maybe it can't go in the machine. But at least they've cast a ballot and they can go on their way while there's a dispute resolution.
I had thought about that scenario and spoke a little bit about it with Charles, and I had said it would need to be a paper ballot because if it came to find out that they weren't eligible, you couldn't put it in the machine. The only thing I had thought about that is, you know, you kind of take away their privacy, because you can basically say, oh, well, we know so-and-so voted for,
Right.
you know,
It's not a
whoever.
secret ballot
It's
anymore.
not really a secret ballot. Absentee ballots, we don't associate a name, we give them a voucher number, but then we also mix them up to allow them to have that privacy. I mean, it's not something, I'm not saying we couldn't do it, but it does kind of take that away from them.
Tracy, correct me if I'm wrong, that really, on election day, that really would be a call of the election judge.
Yes, that's who, when we have a dispute, we go and get the election judge, and then they work with our election board. When city staff just provides the documentation that we had to say, we think this person could vote, or we think this person could vote, and here's why. So it
Thank
kind
you.
of be their call.
Thank you.
Councilman King?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tracy, question, at the very beginning of your conversation, you alluded to, like, business owners, right? So they're not property owners, they're business owners, and they pay city utilities, but that doesn't give them the opportunity to vote in our elections. Is that something that we're gonna bring forth in front of the charter? I missed how you referenced that situation currently.
I think I just referred to non-resident property owners, nothing specific to businesses. We don't currently have a provision in our charter that allows like LLCs and corporations to vote in municipal elections. Our previous city solicitor always said people vote for people, so therefore the owner's name would have to be in a person's name to be eligible to vote in a municipal election. However, when it comes to referendums or special elections, LLCs and corporations do get one vote per parcel, because it does affect, like you said, they pay taxes, so that could basically affect an increase in their taxes.
Well, I'm referencing more like a shopping center, right? So, you know, let's say you got a shopping center, you have one owner, but you've got a lot of people, tenants that are renting businesses that pay city taxes, utilities, services, fees, and they have a desire to vote in the city, but they're not city residents.
We
So-
worked with our city solicitor a little bit on that this past election. And it was shown that, you know, the way our charter reads, that we don't allow businesses. It's people that reside or own property within our city limits.
Okay. And then just one other one. And one with the state currently, and when we come in and somebody comes in and they fill out the book of registries, one of the questions that asks them if they're a U.S. resident.
Correct.
Well, one thing going into a state database, that would already be answered, correct?
Yeah, they already check all those boxes before they put someone registered in their roles.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes,
I just
Councilman
wanted to get
Santos.
clarification. Councilman Santos here. So for any new candidates that were going out campaigning, they would be able to tell someone, you know, if you go to this website, you can register to vote, and it'd be that easy if we were to make the switch?
Yes,
Or-
because Department of Elections does allow you to vote, to register to vote online. Now, we would still have those deadlines, so we would still have to say, you know, we have the fourth Friday in March, you know, they still have to do it by that deadline. So those wouldn't go away unless, you know, we changed our charter, but they do allow that.
Okay.
Okay. Tracy, thank you so much for the effort you put in researching all this. I know you'll continue to.
Yeah, so just a couple comments. Thank you very much for doing that, Tracy. It was great information. We will follow up with Rehoboth Beach, get some feedback for council, as Councilman Henderson has suggested. But at this point, we provided this for information. Should council desire for staff to initiate a change, the process, as Tracy so eloquently laid out, is we would need to draft a charter change, get it in front of this body for approval, work with the city solicitor to put that in the form necessary. And as council is aware, the legislature does not come back into session until January. And traditionally, in our experience, they usually deal with charter changes kind of at the end of the session, has been, you know, the experience we've had when we go up there. So, you know, we wouldn't even get it until June 30th of this year. That's why Tracy's suggesting this lapse in time. So if that's the desire, council's going to have to let us know that's the direction they want us to head. Certainly, staff can do either. You know, we're capable of doing that. We can put these mechanisms into place. We just want to make sure anybody running for council understands the playing field, where the registration database is coming from. But we'll bring the information back regarding Rehoboth Beach. And in the meantime, if there's any other additional information, please give us the feedback. We'll prepare that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, next we'll go on to our first reading of the amended Chapter 8.
And so for that, I'd like to invite our city solicitor, Dan Griffith, to the podium.
Mr. Griffith.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members of council, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate the
evening.
opportunity to address you tonight. What I'm here to address is the proposed adoption of a special events permit ordinance by the city. And I would submit that it would be a very proactive approach by the city to do this. As I'm sure many of you are aware from the national news, there's been a lot of tension between the public's right to use property for protests or for other uses and the government's right to regulate the use of that public property. And a lot of that dispute has centered around the First Amendment. So what we tried to do was adopt something that would give some guidance to the city as to when a special permit would be needed for a public's use of the property, and conversely, when the First Amendment would simply allow the public to use this property without a special permit, a special event permit. One of the misnomers surrounding this debate nationally is that what we're talking about is which events are covered by the First Amendment and which events are not covered by the First Amendment. So the first thing I wanted to make clear that anytime the public uses public property, anytime a member of the public uses public property, that is covered by the First Amendment. It is always a First Amendment use of the property. The public parks belong to the public. Public property always belongs to the public, not to the government. So that being said, the law also provides the government with the right to regulate the public's use of that public property. And when the government is regulating the public's use of property under the First Amendment, the government is only allowed to do so when it takes heed of 4 circumstances. Number 1, any government restriction of the public's use of property has to be what the law calls content neutral. So, for instance, you can't have one religion display something during the holidays without letting other religions display something during the holidays. The content of any use of the property has to be neutral if you're going to regulate it. Number two, the restriction, any government restriction of the public property has to be reasonable in time, place, and manner. So you can't say you're allowed to use the park between 9 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday. It has to be reasonable in time, place, and manner. Number three, the government's regulation of the public property has to be reasonably related to a legitimate government interest. So any restriction we put in our ordinance has to be related to a legitimate interest or a compelling interest that we have. And then number four, it has to be the least restrictive least restrictive regulation for the public's use of that property. So those are sort of the four guidelines that we were governed by in drafting this ordinance. Number one, content neutral. Number two, reasonable in time, place, and manner. Number three, reasonably related to a government interest. And number four, the least restrictive method possible. And so what we try to do is set forth, usually by definitions, what circumstances under which a special permit would be needed, a special event permit would be needed. And that's set forth in the ordinance. But we also identified those areas where there would be exemptions, where First Amendment considerations would prevail over our own considerations. So the language of the ordinance is before you. Those were the considerations. We tried to balance the public's right to First Amendment use of the property versus the government's right to restrict that use under certain circumstances. But that's sort of the background, and we spent some time going through it word by word. And you have it in front of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions in reference to the change on the Chapter 8 special events? Councilman Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Appreciate your time and effort putting this together. I have a question regarding the definition of a member of the public. Does a member of the public include someone who is not a city resident? Because the residents and the businesses of the city fund the operation of a park or a public space. Does it mean that outside groups have every right to use that space?
Not necessarily. I would argue that the city does have a legitimate interest in restricting the use of its public property to its own residents. If the city cannot show that interest, then I would suggest that there is a First Amendment right for other members of the public. But I do believe that if the city could articulate a reason why it's helpful, it advances our interest to limit the use of the property to members of our city, then it would be upheld.
If I could interject, I mean this in the use of public property for the First Amendment rights. I mean, it doesn't preclude us from offering a special event permit to someone that's outside, but someone from Kansas, say, were to show up here and want to have a demonstration, a flash mob demonstration in a park, would be precluded from doing so because they were an outside group and not a residence.
Well, I think you would have to articulate a reason why somebody from Kansas would be differently situated from a resident of the city of Seaford for that purpose. As we've seen throughout the country, there are people showing up in different cities from where they live to protest, and those protests have been permitted. So unless we could articulate a reason why we think somebody from Kansas would behave differently or conduct themselves differently or would require greater city resources for our regulation of that use of the property, then I would be very careful about restricting, for instance, a protest, that only city residents may protest gun violence in our park. I think that would be very difficult to sustain unless we can demonstrate that, hey, anybody outside the city, we would have a difficult time containing. So I think that would be the analysis we would have to go through when determining whether or not to limit the definition of member of the public to the city. And I would suggest there's probably limited circumstances under which we could confine the definition of member of the public to resident of the city.
Because my main concern is that without some sort of protection, that, you know, we, as can be seen in recent history, that demonstrations or gatherings overpower our ability for public safety. And we have to bring in outside resources to control an unruly gathering. So it seems like it's almost always going to be reactionary, because these people will show up and gather. You know, they're not going to ask for a permit. It's not going to be it's not going to be a process. It's just going to be a pop-up thing. So we just need to be able to give the city government some way to regulate that in a lawful way.
So I completely agree, and I think one of the reasons why we drafted this is because prior to this ordinance, there was nothing in writing that the city could point to and say, your gathering has gotten too large, and we are now going to shut it down. This ordinance allows you to do that.
Okay.
It's not just proactive. It allows the city to point to something when somebody says, hey, you are now restricting my First Amendment right to free expression. You can say, well, we have an ordinance that allows us to do this, and the ordinance is constitutional and legitimate. So in my view, the enforcement provisions of the ordinance allow us to address those situations.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, Councilman King?
Yep. How you doing, Mr. Griffin?
Hey, I'm good, thanks.
Good, awesome. Question around the demonstration. So if I understand this special event permit, so before any demonstration event is held on city property, so they're gonna have to come in and pull a permit in order to have this demonstration?
No.
Okay.
So when you say, the term demonstration is
Yep.
pretty broad. So I would submit to you that if my family and I wanted to stand on the corner and we weren't obstructing any traffic or any foot traffic or any, anything else, we were just standing there with a sign that says, I'm anti-city council, I would not need a permit for that.
Okay. Okay, because it seemed a little vague in here, and it seemed to me that if people are coming in and we're making a decision to issue a permit based on a demonstration, then we could violate someone's First Amendment right or constitutional right of speech. If we come and say, hey, we want to have this demonstration and this is what we're demonstrating against, but we need a permit, then it comes in front of us and be yay or nay. I think that's a situation where it could have a lot of pushback as far as violating someone's rights.
Yeah, I think it's hard to address every hypothetical scenario that we would face, but I think the language is broad enough so, but also narrow enough to identify or give the public some idea, some guidance as to when they might need. And to me, the way I would read the ordinance, if I remember the public, it would be, if I'm going to either require city services for my traffic stopped, police presence, something like that, I certainly need a permit for something like that. If I'm going to be using city services for something. If I'm going to be using a public park or a public area for an extended period of time where other people aren't going to be able to use it that might also have a legitimate interest, I think the ordinance could address that and say, well, I'm going to need a permit for that then. Where there is city interest in making sure that they know what time people are going to be using the property. I think the ordinance would address, well, the city needs to know that, so I need to get a permit. But like I said, I don't know that we can envision every scenario that and provide for that in the ordinance, but hopefully the language gives some guidance to the members of the public, because that's one of the purposes of it is to give the public an idea of when they're going to need an event permit and when they're not. And if I were asked by a member of the public, that's the guidance I would give, which is if you think you're going to impose upon the city's services in some way, or if you think the city is going to want to know how long you're going to be using this for, then you're probably going to need a permit. But if you and three of your buddies want to go out and hit a couple baseballs on a baseball field, you probably don't need a permit.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions from Councilman Santos?
Yeah, it's Councilman Santos, I have a question about the application fee of $100. Is that who came up with the price of adding a fee or something?
It was in the ordinance when it was drafted by the attorney.
Okay. And would that have to stay at that price? Can it be lower? Can it be?
I mean, council certainly can set the price, and typically what we do is we set it in the rates, schedule of rates and fees. I would say, though, that processing it administratively does take an effort. So I think $100 is a minimum charge. And when the superintendent of Parks and Recreation processes this, the way we do it now, we send it to every director for their review. So police get it, Public Works gets it, Electric gets it, I get it, the Economic Development Director gets it, so they can all have input should they need to block roads, should they need to provide police protection. So it has to touch a lot of hands, and it takes those people away from other duties they could be doing for residents. So I feel like the $100 fee probably is too low.
It's refundable, it's a deposit, and it's not what's currently on there now.
We changed that in this version.
It's non-refundable. And,
No.
Not in that ordinance.
Correct.
Okay.
and another section here, it talks about they have to have insurance
Yes,
for
sir.
the whole duration. If someone was to go and do this, I feel like there's a lot of different things that they have to do, and it might limit them from going through whatever it is that they're trying to do. But how easy is it for someone to go and get insurance for
Special event insurance?
Yeah, for something like this.
I mean, I have some limited experience with it in that we do it for Riverfest annually, and AFRAM does it for AFRAM. Other events provide that to us, so it can be gotten. I don't know if maybe the city solicitor has a little more experience with it than I do.
It's specialty insurance that not every agency writes, but I would make 2 points. Number one would be very limited circumstances under which that insurance is required. There are 2 criteria that they would have to satisfy. Number one, it would have to be the use of a city street or a portion of the city street. And number 2, it has to be conduct that's not already protected by the First Amendment. So I think there's a really limited category of certain circumstances under which that liability insurance would be required.
So it'd be like getting a farmer's market?
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
right. And for that purpose, there are specialty insurance agencies that do write that, and because it's the time frame of the coverage is pretty much 1 day to 1 week, the premiums aren't terribly high for that type of thing.
Okay. Is it something that someone can just go to State Farm or?
State Farm is more of a property and casualty writer, so it's car and auto, or auto and home. Larger insurance agencies would probably be able to do it. I'm sure there are agencies probably 10 agencies within the county that would write it. Require a few phone calls, though.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Councilman King?
Yep. This would be for Charles. Councilman Santos brought up a good point about the $100 fee. So this is hypothetical, if I'm using the park for a wedding and I don't need any services, maybe we use the porta potties or whatever, versus someone that's shutting the streets down to do a march, and we've got a lot of police force, and so the expense would be much greater for example B than example A, but the fee is the same for both.
Well, I think I'm going to clarify this, but Mr. Griffith is certainly going to correct me. I think what you described there is not a special event permit versus a special event permit. So if you have a very small wedding with just 7 or 8 people using the park, other people can use the park, it's approved, no one has objection to it, there's no streets closed or anything like that, you don't even need a special event permit.
Well, the wedding is actually in the definition for a
It
special
is,
event.
but then if you talk about a very large wedding, okay, and that's going to close the park down, the roads are going to be closed down for the procession, that then gets into the special event permit. Did I state that correctly?
It is. And there's another provision that refers to wedding processions, which are not special events.
And with all codes, just what you said is one of those things that we face routinely. Katie's kind of on the front line of this, but all codes require interpretation. And that's where we endeavor to meet with the people, and we endeavor to find out, okay, what is the event you're having? What are the details of that event? And then we try to kind of tease out exactly what they need. And it's interesting because a lot of people think, I'm just going to have this and I'm just going to do this. You know, and we say to them, you know, well, what about trash? I hadn't thought about that. What about porta potties? I don't know what we're going to do.
Sure.
So we try to coach them and help them a lot, but through that process, we find out, you know, okay, what exactly are you
Right.
talking about?
Well, that brings me back to my original point, why blanket it to $100? I mean, it could exceed $100. And so based on the type of event, based on the size of the event, the cost could be more than $100. I mean,
Yeah,
when you
so-
say, hey, to pull this permit to do this activity, and we're using a ton of police.
Well, so as an example, okay, there is a backpack drive that occurred this Saturday?
August 22nd.
Sorry, August 22nd. So we've met with them, they've done it before. They desire the street on Collins Avenue closed down. I think they said they're going to give out 350 backpacks before school. Big deal, it's great, they do a great job. But what the chief has worked out with them, the deputy chief, over time doing this, they actually have to pay for a special duty officer. The chief can't guarantee he can have a person on shift doing traffic control. So that event has to pay for that specialized police service. So that seems to have worked fine in the past experiences. I don't want to speak for the chief, but, and they understand how it works. They get, the officer that's on special duty helps get residents in and out so we don't get complaints about that. But that's an example where they don't get that for $100. They get that for the $100 and the special duty fee that's worked out between the police. Did I state that correctly, Chief?
Okay.
And
Any other
if I can
questions?
add,
Please.
just by way of generality, this is not an original, not an entirely original work for the city of Seaford. These special event permit ordinances, I wouldn't say are common, but are gaining prevalence throughout the country. And the language that we are using is very consistent, almost verbatim with what typical municipalities are using throughout the country.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? If not, this is a first reading. This will come back
Yes, sir.
through.
Yeah, well, the way we do it, it'll be required to have a second reading, and council can choose to adopt it or modify it at that time. Unless there's objection, we'll bring it back to the next council meeting. And in the interim, if there's any feedback related to any changes or anything, please let Solicitor Griffith or myself know, and we will absolutely will work on that.
Dan, thanks for coming. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Good to see you.
May I be excused from the meeting?
Yes, you can.
Be safe.
See you. All right, next we have the grant from, the grant funding from the chief. Is he coming up?
Yes,
He
sir.
is to present. Evening, chief.
How's everyone?
Good,
Very well. Thank you.
Chief Marshall Kraft with the Seaford Police Department. And today, we just have to put before the council our 2020 JAG. It's a partnership JAG in conjunction with the Milford Police Department. It was signed off on by the county administrator. This year, we were authorized to have $11,390. And in this particular grant, we chose to go with a number of items for technology upgrades, 3 computers and 3 monitors that will be used for computers that have outdated warranties. We can also use one of those computers as a monitor for some surveillance equipment that we have. Also, in addition to that, we needed to upgrade our projector in our conference room. It's an outdated projector. The new projector will allow us to conduct more modern training, which is the route that everyone's going to, multimedia style training where we can actually use a Bluetooth-enabled equipment and project it from an iPad or a laptop or anything of that nature. We're holding more and more meetings in there, and it's something that's necessary now. We also wanted to purchase some training items, a ASP baton training bag and batons, and what that is, it's essentially a telescoping baton. I have it on me now. It collapses. It's a defensive tool, but what we want to do is purchase the training bag and training baton so that we can have our officers annually trained to know the proper strike zones. So we hit people in the meaty parts of the body. Ideally, you have to stay away from certain sensitive areas like the head, for example. You can't always control what happens with the body if someone were to duck, but we want to train annually for that, and we can also use it to deflect someone that might be striking at us. So that's training equipment that we don't have. In addition to that, we'd like to purchase 15 riot helmets. We've been asked back when the protests were really at the heat to assist with other agencies that their departments did have riot helmets. items were being thrown and lodged at individuals. We feel that hopefully it's better to have the equipment and never need it. I personally had one for 31 years with the state police, never had to use it. I retire a year later, everyone's having to wear it. So I think it's important to outfit our officers with the proper equipment and hope that we never need it. In addition to that, part of the coronavirus still puts us in a situation where we're trying to go to a fully wash and wear uniform in addition to our regular uniform. And we've received funding through a coronavirus grant for short sleeves and BDUs. So in this grant, we've asked to also purchase long sleeve wash and wear shirts. It looks like the coronavirus is continuing, state of emergency has been continued. So for that, we have another $3,860.19 to outfit the entire department in case this lasts through next year, or at least through the fall and the winter months. And we can continue to use this as a Class B uniform, which will save the city money as well. And that total amount comes to roughly a little bit more than what we're allotted by about $100. Anybody have any questions?
Any questions for the chief?
Yes, sir.
Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Chief. Can you describe the Class B long sleeve shirt? Is it collared? Is it?
Yes. So yes, it
just
is.
For the public, because they don't.
Yeah, it's a wash and wear uniform. On the coronavirus grant, we purchased proper short sleeve shirts that you can wash in the washing machine. The uniform shirts you can't. They have to be dry cleaned. It takes longer to get them back. The recommended guidance for CDC is that you wash your clothes, change them daily. You can't do that with our regular uniforms. And so this would allow our officers to have 3 additional shirts that they can wash and wear daily. So as you can see, if you only have 3 and you're working shift work, you got to have a minimum of 3 shirts. And that will allow them to stay safer out there in this environment. We don't know how bad it's going to come back. So I believe we have modified school year. We have another extension state of emergency. It really looks like this is going to last through at least this year.
At least through the November election. Okay.
Yeah. And so these shirts will look very similar to our uniform shirts. They're still gray. They're just a wash and wear style uniform shirt.
Okay. Any other questions for the chief? If not, I'll accept the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to approve the grant funding request to be made for the fiscal year 2020 Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistant Grant in the amount of $11,390 to purchase computers and monitors, a projector, ASP training bag and batons, riot helmets, and uniform shirts as presented.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Mr. Mayor, Orlando Holland, I second that motion.
Okay, we have a second. Jessica, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilman Santos?
Aye.
Councilman Henderson?
Aye.
Councilman Holland?
Aye.
Councilman McCoy?
Aye.
Councilman King?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thanks, Chief. Appreciate your work. Okay, do we have any old business, City Manager?
We do not, sir.
Okay, reminder of meetings.
Okay, so the Seaford Police Department Awards Ceremony is at the Seaford Police Department this year due to the circumstances. It's August 13th at 12 noon, so hope to see you there. We also have the Employee Appreciation and Awards Dinner, August 21st, 2020, at Van Duyn Acres, starting at 6 p.m. So if you do desire to attend and have not returned your RSVP, please do that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we'll start off with committee reports. We'll start with Administration and IT. Councilman Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Councilman Santos. As far as meetings go, they attended the municipal separate storm sewer system permitting. It's required by DENREC, and they're going to require additional stormwater monitoring and reporting, and a 5-year permit will be issued. There are endemic COVID relief funds. The city received $20,300 to assist electric customers affected by the crisis. This is going to assist with delinquent bill payments, and if anybody from the public has any more questions, they may call City Hall and ask for program details. There were a couple calls with the governor. They were mostly related to COVID-19. I heard that the numbers are trending pretty low. And as far as the IT report, they fixed some issues regarding the mobile vision. This is the camera that police officers use to that police officers have in their cars, in their vehicles, and they record what, when they pull people over and stuff. They're currently updating the system with new video storage and per the budget. And there was also, let's see, they also attended Global Leadership Summit. There were 7 members that went to a 2-day event, and they had where they learned about leadership. Some people spoke about, they had people talk about 20 to 25 minutes, and they were talking about leadership development. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the employees that did attend the Global Leadership Summit. It was well done. Good speakers. So, okay. Next, we have Police and Fire. Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My report's been submitted in its entirety. I'll just go through some highlights. Seaford Volunteer Fire Department Chief John Wilson has submitted his report, and it's shown. The highlights are fire and rescue calls to date as of 8/10 were 457. EMS calls were 1,906. The fire department was very busy during the tropical storm Isaias. They handled 26 calls from the hours of 0600 to 2100 hours. So in the span of 15 hours, they've handled 26 calls that were storm related. Tower 87 is still out of service. And EMS was particularly busy with the storm, and also to an unfortunate incident at outside of town at the woodshed. Moving on, Second Assistant Chief Tom McCates has sent his July report in, which summarizes the activities and distribution of the calls that you'll be able to see there. The dates and time, the day of the week and the time of day that the calls are concentrated, as well as the EMS and fire reports are there together. I'll move on to police activity. You can see the summary of incidents year to date as compared to last year and or 2019 and 2018. And I would like to move down to a highlighted area that in the coming days I personally will be paying some attention to. And I'll read this. This is from Chief Kraft's report. During this reporting period, several panhandlers were barred from the Walmart property and Seaford Village Shopping Center. Seaford PD made an initial formal contact, no arrest, with the individuals to provide them with formal written notification from the entities of their debarment. The individuals returned to the property after the formal notification and were arrested for trespassing and released. Because of numerous complaints of panhandling and occasional aggressive behavior, Seaford Police Department has placed digital signboards around the city in areas prone to panhandlers. The goal is to discourage citizens from donating to individual panhandlers and to promote donations to local charities that will benefit all of our citizens in need. Love Inc., Ace Peer Center, the Cross Building, Code Purple, and local churches, to name a few. Panhandlers will have access and knowledge of our local charities, but choose to solicit cash. If you want to help, please donate to our local charities. And the final comment would be that to lament the passing of Jeffrey Atkins, who passed away August 8th at an incident at the woodshed. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Chief, thank you for your work on the panhandlers and the effort you've put behind that. I think it's going to make a difference. Appreciate it. All right, next we have Parks and Rec Code Department, Councilman Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to talk to some highlights from each department. We'll start with Parks and Recs. They are repairing irrigation at Riverwalk, and this is the final week of youth field hockey and tennis will be completed. And the meeting was held with City Manager Trish and Deputy Chief Rappa concerning the special events permit for Nutters Park, and limb pickup service is ongoing due to the storm damage. And we'll switch over to the Code Department. They're doing routine inspections for the ongoing projects, and violations for inoperable vehicles are ongoing throughout the city. And if you see this sticker, I can pass it around.
What's that
And-
sticker mean?
That means your vehicle will be towed at your expense, $500. And we certainly appreciate it.
So why would my car get this sticker? What would be the reasoning the
Well,
Code
your reason would
Department?
probably be a triangle for driving too slow.
There you go.
Like you see on the back of a tractor. And curbing has been installed for SS Road for Wawa's, and DOT is to start working this week at Melonsy Ridge. And that concludes my report.
Okay, all kidding aside, though, really, if your car does get one of these stickers, there's a phone number on there to call if you have a question or a concern. It'll be signed and dated and timed, so people will know why their car was tagged, and they can follow up on it.
Yeah, if
So-
we put that on there, it's a code violation, so it's untagged, it's inoperable, it's a nuisance vehicle. So, yeah, we are pushing on that pretty hard throughout the
Right.
city.
I've seen the difference.
Yeah, the
Oh,
Code
yeah.
Department did a big push a couple weeks ago, and they're going to continue that, so we appreciate that effort. So, thank you, Councilman Holland. All right, next we have Councilman McCoy with Electric.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report has been submitted. I'll hit a few highlights. The crew worked 17 hours due to Tropical Storm Isaias. Greg Brook, Nick Smart, and Jordan Marvel went to assist Dover on Wednesday after Tropical Storm to help with restoration. And they extended the underground secondary wire on Poplar Street for the new house. Over the next few weeks, they're going to get truck 3 and 19 serviced and continue changing the lights on Sussex Highway to LED. And do we have pictures lined up, Trish? I believe, yeah. Little photo gallery for you guys to take a look at.
Is that bees?
Yeah.
It is bees.
Wow.
Money as well, yeah. This was over by the golf course, and if you keep going, you'll see where it fell on a transformer, this tree. Yeah, right, there you go.
There's a crew out there working hard.
Without getting stung?
I think they took care of themselves. This was behind Shorestop, so that was an extended power outage. They had to replace a transformer. Everybody, it was all hands on deck. Even the director got in and did a little work, so.
Look at that. Yeah. Lined right up.
They even showed off some of their
Night
climbing
skills.
skills, yeah, in the evening. That was in a backyard that was very, very difficult to access, so some of our younger men, I think they were showing off a little bit, but.
Shimmy up that pole.
I thought that was Phil up there.
No, that was not Mr. Bennett.
He'll appreciate the compliment,
Yes,
though.
he will.
And we get a lot of, a lot of good reviews from our residents as it relates to the electric department. Very proud of them going out there in all hours and all weather and working hard at it. That's been my report. I will mention, you guys mentioned a couple times, Jeff's passing over the weekend. Very unfortunate. Real good guy, man. I got a chance to know him when he was a teenager. One of the first kids I ever met at the Boys and Girls Club. Just, very bubbly guy, man. Always had a smile on his face. Was always laughing. You could hear him down the hallway. You knew Jeff was there. And, I think it's hit this area very hard, just passing. And what I keep thinking about is it's hit a lot of us hard, but he worked with so many young kids that it's it's had to hit a lot of kids out there very hard. And it's truly unfortunate, man. He's a good kid, good young man, and just going to be missed. So.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Councilman. And finally, Public Works Wastewater Treatment, Councilman King.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report has been submitted in its entirety. I'm going to hit some of the bullet points. As everyone alluded to, everyone's out in Public Works Department working extremely hard, preparing before the storm, cleaning up all the drain basins, and then after the storm. And just a word for the residents in our community, just be patient. The limbs aren't isolated to one area. I mean, it's spread out through the entire city, and they'll get there, but it's going to take some time because there's limbs down everywhere. Route 13 water main extension is in the testing phase. Church of God paving prep work and paving has begun. They installed new water service on State Street and on Popular Street. The force main and pump station installation for the United Sewer District is ongoing. And then the Muirfield signs have come in and are installed. Wastewater treatment facility, no major equipment maintenance needed. They have compost to sell by appointment. And some of the upcoming events over the next 2 weeks is, of course, continuing to work on the limb pickup and replace and fix the fire hydrants. And with that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you very much. I do want to give a thank you to Tricia, who led off the storm with an announcement pushed out about keeping the drains cleaned, and then really all of our utility workers that I think sometimes we don't realize how fortunate we are to live in Seaford. We're without our utilities very rarely, and when we are out, it's restored pretty quickly. So you talk to other people in other communities, you find out that's not quite the case. So we take it for granted here in Seaford that our people are jumping on things and things happen, but I just wanted to say a quick thank you. So with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Councilman McCoy, so moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Councilman Santos, I'll second it.
I appreciate that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Good night.